Let me start off by saying this story is 100% true, and I'm honestly still scared to go out at night alone because of this. This is going to be a long story, so bear with me. The other night I had just gotten home from work and I was exhausted like always. My fiance had gone out for a bit to get us dinner and some groceries and to run to GameStop to possibly get a new game. Usually I go with him, but that night I was just too tired. I felt like staying home and watching The Office and just hanging out with my 2 cats. For the last month or so, I've become more and more curious about skinwalkers and their existence. My job can get pretty boring, so I just daydream, and that helps to pass the time. My best friend loves weird things, and I verbally talked to her about them over the last few weeks. I've researched them and listened to their screams. Some people may have heard them on YouTube, and it's pretty creepy. I had cleaned up the kitchen and settled down, and I was about 2 episodes in. I had a nightmare that I was outside in my driveway for some reason, and in my dream I was terrified and couldn't move. I felt eyes on me, and then I woke up, terrified too. I looked at my phone and noticed that I had only been asleep for about half an hour. It was pitch black in the house, and both my cats were gone from the couch, and they usually never leave my side when I'm home. Feeling unnerved, I called my fiancé while flipping on the kitchen and living room lights. He was still in town and he was being quite indecisive about which game to buy, so I got off the phone with him to let him do his thing. I grabbed a soda out of the fridge and went to look for the cats. I found one of them sleeping on our bed, and she's a senior cat, who is a bit overweight, and trust me when I say she doesn't wake up for anything. The other one was staring out the window in our bedroom, and she was growling. I've only heard her growl a few times, usually at our other cat over the food bowl. Suddenly, I heard footsteps outside. I knew my fiancé wasn't home yet, and we live out in the country, and there's woods behind our house. We live in Indiana, and it's been raining here a lot the last few days, and our backyard was pretty flooded, so I knew it most likely wasn't an animal. I tried to ignore it, but I was still a little unnerved from waking up in the dark, so I just sat on our bed on my phone scrolling through Twitter. That's when I started hearing tapping on the window. I jumped about a foot, and my cat dived off the windowsill and crawled onto my lap, and she was shaking. From my research of skinwalkers, I've heard about the mental lure they can have, where if you think or talk about them a lot, it draws them to you. I'm part Navajo, and my grandparents used to live in Arizona, and they know about skinwalkers and always refused to talk about them. The tapping continued, and I felt this feeling of dread consume me. We don't have any guns or any weapons really, other than the kitchen knives. I just sat there terrified, waiting for the tapping to stop. After about 10 minutes or so, my phone rang and I jumped about a foot. My fiancé was calling to tell me he was on his way back, and a bit about the game that he bought, and I did my best to act normal, because I knew he wouldn't believe me. I kept hearing footsteps, and they were moving to the back of the house. We have our deck and sliding glass doors, and I ran to the door to make sure it was locked. Thankfully it was, but then I saw it. It was a shadow of something standing on 2 legs, and it looked wrong in some way. It was around 6 or 7 feet tall, and it was gangly looking. I froze and stood there, hoping it didn't see me. I saw the shadow of it move around the side of the house, and I ran to shut off the kitchen light. I sat in complete darkness, clutching my phone, when I heard our SUV pull into the driveway. I ran to unlock the door, and my fiancé came inside with a couple bags of groceries and a bag of McDonald's. I went to the sliding glass door when he was putting away the groceries, and whatever was outside was gone. I swear I didn't sleep at all that night. I really think I've messed up talking about them and thinking about them. I'm not sure if it's what it was, but honestly, I can't think of anything else it could be. I'm pretty freaked out, and I get a feeling of dread when I go outside now. I know the next time my fiancé leaves to go anywhere, I'm going with him. I'm not sure if this is a skinwalker or a spirit, and I live in Southern California. About a week ago, I was staying at my boyfriend's house. He lives with his mom and stepdad, but they were gone on vacation, and we were watching the 3 dogs. The first night, everything was fine. The dogs slept good in the master bedroom, while we were down the hall in my boyfriend's room. Second night, we crawled in bed around 9 to watch a movie, but the dogs were restless and kept barking and growling in the kitchen. I had to get up multiple times to tell them to stop and go to bed. At 10:30 p.m., I was about to fall asleep when I get a call from my sister who drove out to the desert, Ocotillo, to camp with her boyfriend. She was panicking. She said while they were unpacking their stuff, they heard some sort of cackling, almost like laughter, but not totally human sounding. It was followed by a very deep, almost fake-sounding howl. She said it sounded similar to a hyena laugh, but deep. There were no hyenas in San Diego County. Coyotes maybe, but that's pretty recognizable. She asked her boyfriend if he heard it too, and he said yes. They estimated it was within 200 feet from them. Both of them got freaked out, knowing it wasn't a coyote. They packed their shit and got in the truck. Driving away, they were looking around with a flashlight and saw nothing. No other campsites. No people anywhere near them. No coyotes. I calmed her down on the phone, and they ended up moving to a different area, closer to a ranger station and other people. I immediately thought Skinwalker, because I've read posts about them before, but I didn't want to put that in her head at the moment, and I ended up going back to sleep. About 2 hours later, I woke up to one of the dogs whining and scratching at our bedroom door. I start to get out of bed, and I hear what sounds like a car alarm. I looked out the window, and it wasn't our cars, so I opened the door to let the dog in, and the sound got louder. I realized it was coming from somewhere in the house. I woke up my boyfriend, and we both walked down the hallway and saw all the dogs standing outside the master bedroom. When we walked inside, we realized it was his mom's alarm clock going off at 12:33 a.m. We were trying to figure out how to turn it off, but none of the buttons were working. We pressed every single one until he finally unplugged it and shut it off. I told him how creepy it was that the alarm would just go off out of nowhere. He thought maybe his mom accidentally set the alarm before she left and didn't realize it was 4 a.m. instead of p.m. I thought about it for a second, but then realized we had been there for 2 nights by ourselves and it hadn't gone off. If his mom had already set it, it would have gone off the previous night, not 2 days later. He kind of just brushed it off and said it was glitching, and we turned to head back to bed. We told the dogs to go to bed, but they were still standing outside the door. None of them wanted to come in and lay on their beds. We ended up going back to our room, and they followed us, laying down on the floor. I told my boyfriend how I was freaked out about the dogs being angsty, and then getting that call from my sister, and then the alarm clock going off. He said, yeah, it's weird, but it's fine, which didn't make me feel any better. The only thing that kept going through my mind was that there's something in the house. I can feel it. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, I called my sister and told her what happened, and she said that she had the same feeling all night, that something was near us and that she could just feel it. She said that she doesn't think it was a coincidence. Something was messing with her, and because she told me about it, it came and messed with me too. I believe it. I also believe that something was luring us to the room with the alarm clock, and the dogs knew. That's why they followed us to the room and stayed with us the rest of the night. I don't know for sure if it was a skinwalker, but we're both in an area that has multiple Native American reservations nearby. Whatever it was trying to scare us, and it worked. This story recollects what happened during the Navajo Nation Fair season of 2015. My roommate and her boyfriend decided to head back to the reservation to take part in the festivities, rodeo, parade, and carnival. My roommate was the offspring of divorced parents and spent her teenage years half on the reservation in Window Rock, Arizona, with her mother and half with her father in Phoenix. She was raised as devout Catholic, even attending Catholic school. Nothing paranormal had ever occurred to her in her lifetime up until this point. Her boyfriend was an urban Navajo who was Christian, having been born and raised off the reserve in Phoenix, Arizona. I'm declaring their religious ideologies and affiliations because neither of them believed in Navajo traditionalism or ghost stories. Late one evening, after both of them got off work, they decided to head out to make the most of the 3-day fair weekend. My roommate had made prior accommodations with a friend from high school. The accommodations were as follows. Her good friend opted to stay at the close relatives and offered her 2-bedroom, 2-bath manufactured home at their disposal. The trailer was located off the road between St. Michael's and the first 4-way intersection. As you can imagine, they arrived to their Navajo Fair B&B pretty late. The trailer was off to the right of the main highway, and it was situated on the foot of a large rolling hill. There was no streetlights. First order of business. My roommate calls her friend to let her know that they arrived safely. They walk up to the trailer and unlock the door, and give themselves a tour of their accommodations. They turned on all the lights in every room as they toured. My roommate had driven the entirety of the journey, so she was a bit more fatigued than her partner. She asks him to go get the luggage from the car. It was a hatchback. The car was parked about 40 feet away, and she explained to me that it rained some weeks before and the dirt road leading up to the house was wrecked. To avoid bottoming out, she parked on the level ground. She walks into the guest room and her boyfriend is already on the bed. She pleads with him to go get the luggage and, most importantly, her makeup bag, so she can remove her makeup before bed. She compromises with him that she'll go out with him if he does the heavy lifting. She doesn't want to put her heels back on, so she decides to watch him from the porch. Yes, heels. She worked at a bank and had to always dress professionally in a pantsuit and heels. So she's standing at the top stair of the small 3-stair porch with the front door slightly ajar. Her hand is on the doorknob and her boyfriend walks off into the pitch black. The light from his phone serves as the only beacon of light signaling his direction. As she watches his light grow dimmer and smaller in the distance, she hears what seems to be a pack of dogs barking and howling. She says it sounded like a rumble, a pack of feral Ruz dogs or coyotes fighting. The pack of dogs come barreling down the large hill off the trailer. She hears a loud thud against the back wall of the trailer. It was so loud that she heard the rattling of the picture frames that were hanging. At this point, fear begins to creep into her mind. She calls out to her boyfriend, but hears no response. She shouts for him once again, and then she realizes the dogs have all gone silent. All at once, in a fluid succession of motions, she said that something from inside the trailer slams the front door. It was so fast that it creates a gust of wind. She said that if she hadn't been holding onto the doorknob, it would have knocked her off the landing of the front steps. The front porch light flickers and goes dead. She's standing there barefoot in the darkness and tries to open the door and retreat back into the trailer. She was able to turn the doorknob until it clicked. The door wasn't locked. Something heavy was pressed up against the flimsy manufactured hollow core door from the inside. At this point, she said she hadn't realized she was crying and at the brink of an anxiety attack. Adrenaline took over and she began throwing herself and all of her weight against the door. She said she saw it inch open and the light from the inside flooded the doorway for a split second before it slammed shut in retaliation. Fight or flight, she decides to run barefoot into the darkness to find her boyfriend. Now here's his account. He leaves his girlfriend at the top of the front door steps as he walks off into the dark, his phone serving as his only flashlight. He's being very careful where he steps as the earth is turned up and twisted and gnarled, and he's afraid that he might twist an ankle. He too hears the frenzied howls and barks of the dogs. He turns around to see where the sounds are coming from. In the distance, he sees the faint porch light go off. He rationalizes to himself that the dog's barking scared his girlfriend, and in fear she ran inside and unintentionally turned off the light. He continues walking in the direction of the car, but he hears the thud of heavy footsteps behind him, mimicking his own stride. It wasn't exactly in tune with his. It It was following a split second after his own, almost echoing his own, intentionally. Figuring it might be his frightened girlfriend running out to find him, he calls out to her, but with no avail. He sees a dim flicker in the distance, the light from his phone bouncing off the reflectors of the tail lights of the car. His body floods with relief, but the relief drains quickly to his despair. His phone erratically dies, and his heartbeat almost beats out of his chest. How could this be? He wasn't on his phone the entire drive back. It was fully charged. He takes a few urgent paces towards where the car was before the lights turned off. His palms were sweaty, and he swears he could feel his heartbeat pounding from his hands. He desperately reaches into his pockets for the car keys. He's frantically pressing all of the buttons, the lock, the unlock, panic, and open hatchback buttons. Nothing. He even stretches out his hand in the dark as he presses the buttons, thinking he's on the cusp of the electronic radius of the car. The footsteps behind him then hastened, and almost sounds like he's going to be charged from the back, but he's too terrified to look back. At this point, he realizes the dread he feels in the pit of his stomach. It means something is unnatural. His shoulders drop as if instinctively bracing for some sort of impact. The sound of heavy footsteps running towards him indicating that he's going to be hit. Nothing. The footsteps loudly lead directly up to him, to his heels, and then nothing. He opens his eyes. He hears something like a coin drop and hit the top of the car. He turns around to the patter of bare feet on the dirt. His girlfriend charges into a full embrace, hugging him and burying her face into his chest. Mind you, his feet stay planted. He doesn't take one step forward or back. The car keys are still in his hand. His thumb presses down. A loud click, the familiar sound of the hatchback automatically opening, and the light from inside the car quickly floods their immediate surroundings. They grab their luggage and a pair of flip-flops from the car, and slowly make their way to the trailer. Oddly, the front porch light is now on. My roommate makes her boyfriend go inside and check all of the rooms. He checks each room meticulously, but there is no one inside. All of the windows are still locked, from the inside too. Once in the safety of the trailer, her boyfriend pulled out his cell phone and it was back to full battery. They corroborate their experiences to recount what happened to each other. Both of them are dumbfounded at the fact that they were shouting at the top of their lungs, but neither of them could hear the other ones yelling. Growing up on the res, you'll hear your fair share of skinwalker and ghost stories, but this was the first time I heard one, where the perpetrator manipulated electronics to the great extent, or even at all. It was also the first case where the perpetrator manipulated the sound waves. Both of them swore that they were easily in earshot of the other, but weren't allowed to hear the other one's cries. There were no structures or trees between them obstructing the sound waves. He had heard the pack of dogs, but wasn't allowed to hear her screaming out for him. What also spurred me to share this was the massive amount of questioning from some Reddit users. If they exist, why haven't they been filmed or caught on camera? Skinwalkers are just as modern as you and me. Wicked as they may be, they are not stupid, and deal with smartphones and technological advances as much as anyone, and they walk the world as normal people during the day. This story came from my great-grandmother and takes place on the old reservation in Arizona about 32 years ago. She had a pretty decent-sized property. On this property, she had 3 hogans, a large cornfield adjacent to the 3 hogans, a large wall on the opposite side of the cornfield, and a grazing pasture for her 12 sheep and 4 horses. At the end of the day, she would take the horse and herd the sheep into a smaller pen closer to the house. She says that one day she told everyone she was going to herd up the sheep as usual. She hopped on her favorite horse and found the sheep probably a mile or so away from the house. She counted 11 sheep, so she started to search for others by making circles around the area, increasing the diameter of each circle. She found the last sheep up the hill from the herd, standing alone in the open. She spurred her horse and started trotting over. But as she got closer, she started to notice that whatever she was seeing was definitely not a sheep. At the same time she noticed, her horse stopped in its tracks, and its ears perked up. She said that it's the way that it was standing that gave it away, and the wool of the sheep didn't look right, almost like it had been taped on and was starting to fall off to one side. It was hard for me to believe what happened next, but she said it stood up and turned around. It was an old medicine man with a sheepskin cloak, but this isn't what she had seen before. He stared at her, and she said the bloodlust in his eyes made her want to cry and hide. The horse reared up at the sight of this, throwing her to the ground, and she blacked out. Now this is where I start to believe the story. A few hours later, my father, grandfather, and uncle hopped on their horses and rode out to look for her. They found the herd of sheep, and they started to panic when she wasn't nearby. They followed the tracks up the hill and found her unconscious in the snow. Her horse had been slaughtered. A section of its throat was missing, and it had multiple scratch wounds on its chest and front legs that my grandfather said had to be at least 1.5 inches deep. Around my grandmother in a perfect circle were footprints and handprints, like someone had been trotting around her on all fours. My grandfather also emphasized that it was a perfect circle. My grandmother doesn't remember waking up or being sick for 2 weeks after the encounter, but my father, uncle, and grandfather all told me that they spent those weeks questioning her sanity. She was puking up an unusual green, foul-smelling liquid and having sporadic fevers. I asked all of them different times after my grandmother told the story. My uncle and father live in different parts of Arizona, and my grandfather split from my grandmother, but they all told me pretty much the same story about what took place afterwards. I even got some other experiences from them. I have no way of proving this is true, but after seeing my grandmother get so uncomfortable by telling me the story 30 years later, I believe it with all my soul. This story happened to my cousin who was visiting our grandmother on the Navajo reservation. He was what you call an urban Navajo, born and raised in Phoenix and rarely visited the res. He was raised in the church and was aware of certain Navajo taboos and folklore, but didn't heed any or abide by any. Him and his older brother used to stay at our grandmother's during the summer and help out with chores and the livestock. They called it sheep camp. Being from the city, I guess they just liked the term sheep camp, when in reality it was just our grandmother's permanent residence. Like most rural residences on the reservation, old automobiles and appliances that no longer worked piled up in the front yard due to a lack of transportation or waste management options. There was an obsolete refrigerator from the 80s on the far left side of my grandma's porch, and a broken-down muscle car from decades earlier. The car was more of a skeleton, a forgotten remnant that rested about 30 feet far to the left in perfect eye line from the porch. The model of the car I cannot remember, but the windows had all been busted out and the upholstery weathered and cracked. The desert sand reclaimed most of it. The tires were shredded and half buried. If you grew up on the res, this served as a derelict jungle gym or playground. My mother and I decided to visit my grandma one summer afternoon when I was 12 years old, the same age as my cousin. We greeted everyone upon our arrival, and our grandma fed us. My cousin asked if I wanted to take a walk into the canyon, and told me he had something to tell me with urgency. As soon as we were out of earshot from any adults or his older brother, he told me that something had happened earlier that day, around 5:30 a.m. Although it was summer, in Arizona, the desert is easily many degrees colder at night and early mornings. He told me he was awoken by the urge to relieve himself. The sky was dark blue before the dawn. He was half asleep and it was too cold to run all the way outside to the outhouse, no inside plumbing. He continued to say that he darted to the left to pee behind the old refrigerator and off the porch. His eyes were half closed and his mind was still a bit hazy from just waking up. Then he hears the distinct sounds of something jagged and sharp scratching in long successions on metal, accompanied with the heightened whimpering of a sheepdog. His eyes opened wide, and he tries to scan the horizon to locate the origins of the sheepdog. Initially, he thought that he saw the dog trapped in the car, but there were no windows or glass obstructing the dog's escape from the wreckage. He witnessed the dog's clawing and scratching to fight its way out of the window frame of the driver's side, its front paws clawing to the outer shell of the car's door, making the sound of nails on a chalkboard. He finished urinating and dazedly took one step off the porch to help the dog out of the car. Suddenly, he freezes in his tracks as a cold, wicked laugh rips through the early dawn air. His eyes immediately fixate on where the laugh is originating from, inside the car. He rubs his eyes and focuses his gaze on the dog, and his eyes follow along the dog's torso. Then he sees something. It has its arms and claws wrapped around the waist of the dog, preventing it from escaping. At this point, the sun had inched and crept over the mesa and turned the sky from a pale blue to a yellow. The pale yellow light reveals that the driver's side of the car is completely covered in smeared blood. He bolts back inside and slams the door behind him. He doesn't tell anyone because he's paralyzed with fear. Fear that if he talked about it, nothing would stop it from busting in the door, killing him, his brother, and our grandma. I asked what it looked like, or if he had even seen what had been holding the dog against its will. He said it looked like a werewolf, but a sickly werewolf with mange. He noted that it wasn't hairy, but you could almost see dry, cracked, gray skin underneath. He said before he ran, he slouched down to see what was holding the dog inside the car, and whatever it was, grinned. Its wicked smile was filled with sharp, jagged teeth, beaming from side to side. In all honesty, I thought he was lying to me and trying to scare me, thinking I was some dumb, uncivilized rezzer who would believe a werewolf tale. We spent some time in the canyon playing on boulders and throwing rocks into the small stream. I had all but forgotten what he shared with me until we made it back to my grandma's house. That's when he asked if I wanted to see the scene of the crime, but I was skeptical. Then we walked up to the car in question. I couldn't believe it. There were tufts of bloody, multicolored dog fur caught in the window frame, and bloody paw prints and smears on the outside of the driver door. There were long scratch marks from the dog everywhere, not sharp enough to cut through the metal, but enough to make a slight indent. I stood there in amazement and fear. All we did was throw dirt on the blood markings, and I haven't spoken of it until right now. Side note, the sheepdog wasn't murdered. We spent all late afternoon looking for her. We later found her under an abandoned manufactured home on the property. She was afraid to come out for a couple of weeks, so my cousin said he brought her food and water for the remainder of summer break.